Chapter 491. You messed up. Dominic watched as Alexis and a few of her royal guard marched over to where he was getting the girls from Dagos settled. All right, explain yourself, and it had better be good, because you've caused chaos in the debutante event. Dominic shrugged. They're debutantes, sent from Dagos with a rather minimal dowry. There are no soldiers with their group, other than 3 deserters who are at Larry's clinic. So, I'm setting them up here next to the trolls, where they can sleep in relative safety while they try to convince the noblemen that they deserve a shot. I did consider simply turning them away, but worst-case scenario, they can take on a debt contract to stay or get a day job, possibly marry a commoner with a good job. There's plenty of options if they're desperate enough. Did you check to see if any of them needed trauma counseling or perhaps deprogramming to keep them from working as spies? They definitely need trauma counseling. But I don't know how to do that, and one of them is pregnant by a knoll. That's way out of my area of expertise. As far as deprogramming, I don't think that they'll need it. They've been through quite a bit on their way here, and from what me and Dave were able to gather, they were sent away more for their own safety. Sold to the soldiers as brides, a reward for what was supposed to be the conquest of Westover, but which never even made it to use, because the wild monsters they unleashed to the north of us simply killed and ate their entire army. They lost the last of their soldiers to the trollish village, and I have ordered them a truckload of goats as a reward. Dominic explained. Why a truckload of goats? Most of the trolls are vegetarian. They like goats. Dominic's simple shrug made Alexis roll her eyes. It was true that the trolls did like goats, but enough to pay them in goats as a reward? That seemed like a stretch. However, she didn't spend as much time with them as Dominic did. She had her own guards, and at most they would just get 1 or 2 trollish shadows when they went out around town. Which wasn't often, as so much had been going on around the manor that they'd had to summon everyone to them, or request items with a messenger. Alexis paused her response when she saw some of the young noblemen headed toward them. One was a son of a northern count, and flat-out ugly from birth, while the other was a soldier of the Natural Sons Regiment who had massive scarring that healing magic hadn't cured. It covered his face, his chest, and one of his arms. Dominic guessed it was likely magical fire, possibly from an Eton mage, which tended to leave lingering damage unless high-level healing magic was used for the first round. They were definitely headed for the ladies, and not for them, she decided. But the 2 men stopped a polite distance from the tent and whistled to get the attention of those inside. A few of the braver girls came out, and the soldier offered them scented soap bars, the very good stuff from the capital. If they were from lower noble families in a border town, they would have run out of it long before they ever left home. If they had ever been in a position to have their families spent luxury money on them. The girls giggled and flirted with the 2 men, who offered to escort the Dagos group to dinner and introduce them to some friends. There might be an imbalance, but that didn't mean that every nobleman was guaranteed to score a wife here today. The debutante balls lasted for a year or more before most of the ladies had made a choice, or their families had done it for them. This was just the biggest of them all. With the girls from Dagos afraid they would get snubbed, and the less desirable men already aware that they would as well, it was a natural move to try to land themselves a good wife before any of the others saw past her origin and started to view the Dagos debutantes for their talents. It was a brilliant strategy, even if both sides knew that the other was looking down on them in some way. Alexis sighed as she realized what was going on. Dominic, gather some of the boys, and we will introduce the ladies of Dagos properly. Just let me do the speaking, so that it doesn't cause an even greater incident. Dominic smiled. I knew that you would come through. The smack to the back of his head was as sudden as it was completely predictable. Yeah, I earned that one. But look how happy they are. His voice was a bit loud, and the 2 men turned to look at him. I said look how happy you are, you ugly bastards. Dominic shouted to them. The 2 men laughed and straightened their coats. But I'm rich, damn it. And well-dressed. Dominic laughed at their good-natured comebacks, while Alexis glared at him, and the ladies tried to hide their amusement. After a moment, the royal guards brought more men over, following Alexis' orders, as they knew that Dominic would take too long to do it himself. He had already gotten distracted, and the princess wasn't going to wait forever. Especially now that the ladies were nearly finished preparing for the event. Ah, wonderful. Ladies, Your escorts for the first event of your stay are here. Gentlemen, meet the newest arrivals, a fine group of noble ladies who have traveled here all the way from Staptentave," Dominic announced. Both sides looked relieved that he had put it somewhat delicately, while Alexis' look of anticipated pain had yet to fade. The other ladies would get over themselves, Dominic was certain. After all, they didn't even want these men. Why should they object? Chapter 492. Dominic the Savvy? He was wrong. Oh, so very wrong. The fact that they did not particularly want the men who came looking for the ladies of Staptentave had no bearing on the fact that the other noble debutantes found it completely unacceptable that they should stop paying them any attention, much less move on to other ladies. And the vengeance was in full swing not even 5 minutes after they had joined the party. The sound of a splash drew Dominic's attention, and he found a grim-looking young lady holding back tears as she climbed out of the fountain. Or perhaps that was just water running down her face. But some of the water was red, and the royal guards were rushing over to heal her injuries before she went to change into something dry. "What did I tell you?" Alexis whispered. "That I know nothing about women, and this was bound to end badly?" Dominic asked, just now grasping how true that statement was. "It was a mistake to house them here. You should have left them in the city, in the commoners' area," she corrected. "They would all be dead by morning if I had. Plus, they're cute." Half these soldiers would have been happy with a common girl who had some life skills and a dowry, but now they can tell their families that they married a girl from a proper noble family. That's assuming that any of them survived the wrath of the other ladies, I suppose. They're a bit more upset than I expected. Alexis smiled and patted his shoulder. "Watch and learn. This is the true way of snark and backstabbing. See the girl in the cherry blossom hairpin? She's about to drug the Baron's daughter from Axbridge with an aphrodisiac. They've been competing for Commander Dax and haven't noticed that he's onto their games. Then, we have the niece of a Margrave that fully intends to stab that girl in the red. The veiled maids are on it and all violence is strictly prohibited, so she will try to make it look like an accident. Then we have the usual bullying, and Princess Poppy's friends trying to hit on her brother while the princess is distracted." Dominic laughed as Poppy caught one of her ladies-in-waiting sliding a hand up Prince Fahad's vest. She was quite adamant that they were not here for that, and they had already had their chance to land the crown prince. But what it looked like she wanted was for Fahad to make it no further than flirting during this event. Conversely, she was actually quite skilled at introducing others. The soldiers who were a bit shy with the ladies were smoothly guided to groups with someone they had been covertly watching, under the guise of congratulating them on their achievements, and the clueless ones who weren't getting that their advances were falling on deaf ears were guided by her friends to groups where they had a better chance. "It's brilliant, I tell you. I wonder if I would have learned any of these skills had I remained under my uncle's care?" Dominic pondered. Alexis was certain that he would. His draconic lineage couldn't possibly belong to the family lineage that he had known as a child, and someone would have inevitably ensured that he knew everything he needed before he was reclaimed by his real parents. But she didn't have the heart to say that out loud. Dominic held tight to his childhood memories, even if he had gifted the house that he grew up in to the witch coven. That was a move that she did not understand at all. But perhaps he just wanted someone to make better memories in the old house to replace the bad ones. Dominic wasn't that deep. He had simply given them the house because it was the one best suited. If he wanted to feel nostalgic, he would just go visit them. Alexis noticed that Dominic was sneaking away again and watched as he deftly disarmed a debutante and replaced the broken glass stem in her hand with a paper plate holding a pastry. "Sorry about that. Those glasses are a bit fragile. They're an experimental design from the factories, and it seems they still need work. I will be sure to improve the next batch. Have you met Abe and John yet? Both are fine young men, and they've gained knighthoods from the king." "Abe, John, meet Melissa of Kern," the girl added politely, looking disinterested. Abe smiled at her. "Melly, I haven't seen you in years. To think you've grown so much." The girl looked confused, but Abe paused to give her a moment to remember him before he gave in, and just told her. "My father financed your family's new granary and milling company 10 years ago. For a few summers, I was constantly at your house, helping with the errands while they negotiated the business deals," he explained. "Potato? Potato?" Abe patted her on the shoulder with a smile. I knew that you would remember eventually. But if the Duke hadn't said your name, I would have never connected that little girl to the beauty you've grown into. John winked at Melissa. Don't think that you can just call him Potato and then change the subject. We've got to know how Abel Baker grew out of a boy named Potato. Why do you call him that? Because I'm the only one who can bake biscuits without burning them. Abel Baker. He peeled a potato for me and told me it was an apple. But it was delicious, and I chased him around for weeks demanding more. That's how he became Potato. Melissa explained, then waved someone over. These are my roommates from the academy. Girls, this is John, and that handsome fellow is Potato. You found him? He's an actual real person, not a story you made up to make your childhood sound less boring. But what is his real name? You don't need to know that. Now that I have my Potato, I will have him locked down by the end of the day. Feisty, I like that. But we can discuss the details in private later. Chapter 493. Ladies of the Academy. The girls of the Capital Ladies Finishing Academy, one of the lesser noble academies, were intensely interested in all things chiseled muscle and trained soldier. It didn't take a genius to guess that their minds were going somewhere down a romance novel route, and the blush on their cheeks was not entirely from makeup. Alexis gave Dominic a knowing look, and he called a few more of the soldiers over. The men of the Natural Sons Regiment had long since given up on the notions of arrogance and noble superiority. They hadn't even expected to remain as nobles until they volunteered to join the regiment during the war. Now, they were heroes to the people, and the strong presence that spending months on a wall withstanding a siege had given them was proving incredibly popular with the ladies. Not all of them, but enough that the knights were far from lacking options. Dominic was confident that things were finally starting to settle down, and that the majority of the Dago's ladies were safe from the more violent jealousy of the others when news came from the airships. There were portals opening outside the city, and soldiers coming through in uniforms that they didn't recognize. The messenger froze as a smile slowly spread across Dominic's face. Princess Alexis, would you like to do the honors, or should I? He asked, almost giddy with excitement. I won't ruin your fun. Go ahead and call the boys to go play. Dave, let's go welcome some unexpected guests. Riflemen, stand ready, Dominic shouted, and a cheer went up from the Natural Sons. They had been sent home as the siege was over, but nobody had believed that the enemy would simply give up so easily. Amy appeared at his side, and a portal opened, revealing an open field that was quickly filling with soldiers wearing unfamiliar uniforms. Do you know who those are? Dominic asked quietly. That's Shersdonia's uniform, but I see some Dago's regulars wearing the red of the old royal family, so they should be the prince's men. Be careful. I suspect that the Ormsted sect will be with them in full force. Cast a fireproofing spell on Dave. We will only leave Larry here to guard the walls. Dominic instructed. That gave him 45 fully armored mountain trolls, plus Amy. A good start. Dominic led his force through the portal before even taking time to think about who had opened it for them. It wasn't a mystery for long, as the combat forces of the Duskblade sect appeared as soon as the wall of Dave was through, followed by hundreds of riflemen, battle-worn weapons ready and clashing with their party outfits. A lone figure stepped forward of the Shersdonia lines, and Dominic moved in front of the shield wall to go meet the enemy commander. Prince Dominic, I have heard much about your abilities after you arrived in Signia. It is unfortunate that you have gathered such powerful enemies. The man began. Dominic shrugged. I have had powerful enemies all my life, whether I wanted to admit it or not. I don't see how this is any different than it was, other than that they know where to find me now. The mage shrugged. Dominic wasn't wrong. If they had caught him years ago, they would have killed him without remorse or consideration. So, how are we doing this? Are you going to give me a self-righteous speech about how I'm a war criminal, and then order your men to attack? Dominic continued. The mage smiled, and power surged around his hands. We can skip the speech. The fireball exploded around Dominic's area barrier, and the crack of repeating rifles made everyone's ears ring as Dave roared, and the line of trolls charged forward to put their boss back behind the line. Dominic ineffectually bombarded the mage with arcane blasts as they both retreated, and the Dago's army fired cannons at the charging trolls, filling the battlefield with smoke. Dave laughed as the cannon fire crashed into the shields and failed to take down their barriers. These were great shields. Mages began to ascend, using magic to fly so that they could rain hellfire on the battlefield, but from an extended distance, so it was harder for the Dago's sharpshooters to hit them. Sharpshooters that were falling fast with the Natural Sons Regiment in action. The trolls slammed into the line of soldiers, and the clubs began swinging, throwing gore and entire bodies in the air as the spikes caught on armor. Dominic hit some that were still moving with Arcane Blast, gaining the bonus of healing and mana regeneration, while also keeping them from getting back up behind the main lines. The air lit up in a dozen colors as the mage battle overhead grew more intense, but the ground battle was turning into a one-sided slaughter. The trolls were unstoppable, and the riflemen had spread out to fire mortars into the conventional army, thinning their ranks before the trolls arrived. That was where Dominic remained, right behind the trolls, doing cleanup and protecting them when the mages tried to hurl fireballs at them. Amy had given them fireproofing, but he really didn't want to test it. Dominic could hear orders being shouted in the distance, but behind a line of trolls, he couldn't see much, other than the fact that they were still fighting shoulder to shoulder, with their heads down, so nobody shot them in the face. The sound of mortars was getting further ahead of Dominic, a sure sign that the regiment was beginning to surround the soldiers. So, the battle's deciding factor was mostly on the mage battle in the air. Stepping back from the line, Dominic switched from his pistols to his new rifle to get a better shot at the mages in the distance. Their barriers might be good, but so were the mana bullets. The Royal Guard were holding position on the other side of the portal to town, keeping the princess safe, while still being close enough that they could heal the trolls if something went horribly wrong. It would be up to Dominic to make sure that didn't happen. Chapter 494. Orm's Sect. Dominic took a knee and carefully aimed at one of the stronger mages fighting a Duskblade sect elder, then fired. The mana bullet shattered barriers and punched a large hole in the middle of his chest, but the mage didn't immediately drop. That wasn't right. But it made perfect sense once he remembered that the king of Shersdonia was a necromancer lord. The next round got an arcane blast added to it, with Dominic desperately hoping that it would be effective instead of simply damaging the body, but leaving the mage in the fight. The Duskblade sect was having good luck defeating them with spells, so there had to be something that worked, other than holy magic. If he were one of the royal paladins, a bunch of undead mages wouldn't be much of a threat. Every skill that they specialized in was anathema to the undead. This one didn't have a barrier up when the bullet hit, and the arcane blast seemed to sap the energy from his body, as vitality flowed into Dominic. As the mage's power faded, his body turned to dust, leaving no doubt that the technique was effective. The number of mages in the Ormstead sect was low, and against the Duskblade sect, who specialized in assassinations and bodyguard missions, they were hopelessly outmatched. Which left the question of why. Why had they come on the attack today? Then Dominic saw the truth. In the back of the battle, atop a hill where the next wave of reinforcements were coming through a portal, he caught a glimpse of the commanders. Nobles from Dagos as expected, but looking gaunt and half-starved. They were not attacking out of some grand plan, but out of desperation. The war had depleted the food supplies. The sieges of their cities had been just as effective as the monster sieges they had initiated in Dagos and Skipple. And now, they were hoping for a single major victory. Or perhaps they were simply hoping to raid the area for supplies and bring them back home. They had to be basically out of money by now. Feeding armies was expensive, many magical rituals required expensive materials, and all trade had been cut off with their home cities. Even with the support of Shersdonia, they would still be struggling to keep up the battle. Not that the lands of the Necromancer King were in particularly bad shape, but they were not wealthy enough to support the large cities of northern Dagos for any considerable amount of time. One of the Dagos nobles dropped, hit by a bullet from the regiment's sharpshooters, and the others ducked behind cover as the soldiers were sent through the portal. Given enough bodies, they could surely take out 50 mountain trolls, even if Dominic had given them shields and full armor. But those bodies were struggling to make it to the front lines now, and the men of the regiment had a system to keep up the assault. They had made more mortar creation magitech orbs while they were away, and they were working in groups of 5, with 4 shooting and 1 creating munitions for the reload. Then, when he got mana depleted, they would switch. Backed up by riflemen, that gave them a steady stream of artillery to shell the Dago's position, and soon they would have the invaders pushed right back through the portals they had come from. Dominic continued to fire up into the mages, smoothly eliminating them with spell-enhanced rifle rounds. But the ease was disconcerting. Why had they sent all these mages, knowing that there was a powerful sect here to counter them, and that there were thousands of troops in the city? Even if they didn't know that the natural sons had returned, there were the forces which had been sent to guard the royals and emissaries from Axbridge and Mitfield. They wouldn't stand by as the area was invaded, and the presence of the Ormsted sect was nearly definitive proof that Shersdonia was involved in the Dago's rebellion. It would be a huge political issue for them if the news spread, and no king would cause himself problems with such an ill-conceived plan. Plus, there was no upside for him. Wavemates did not border Shersdonia. It didn't have natural resources that Shersdonia did not, and it didn't have a large population if the Necromancer King was looking to form an undead army. If that was the goal, then sending his mages to one of the major sieges would have been a far superior plan. They could have stocked up with monsters and dead soldiers to form a massive army of undead. But they hadn't. Dominic's mind wandered as he picked targets. He was missing something about this situation that was guaranteed to be critical information, but he simply couldn't fathom what it could be. Perhaps it was in the history books within the manor? They had survived the battle, and there might be some knowledge of the Necromancer King in there. It had only been a decade, and he was an older man already. If he had extended his life with dark magic, there should be quite a bit of history between him and the Dragon King recorded. Then, the airships arrived, raining explosive cannonballs on the battlefield, and the Dago's army completely broke. Those who could surrender threw down their weapons, while many of the others tried to run back through the portals, only to have them shut in their faces, leaving them stranded and at the mercy of Wistover's forces. With what they had been told about the region and what they had seen here today in battle, that did not give them any confidence that they would be granted mercy. Dave had done his job very well. Gentlemen, gather the prisoners. I believe that we have a trial coming, and it wouldn't do to have all of the guests of honor dead before we begin. Dominic instructed. Behind him, Alexis laughed. He really was too good at poorly phrasing things in a way that would reinforce his reputation for brutality. However, that was not her major concern. After the battle, Dominic was radiating power, thanks to all the vitality that he had absorbed from the soldiers and mages he had dropped with Arcane Blast. That much was normal for him, but today the power was off. Something about the undead mages was different, and the power in his body was much higher than normal, almost as if a bit of the undead was clinging to him, or trying to corrupt his power before it was integrated. She needed to get Commander Wilkes or a priest over here to cleanse him. Chapter 495. Make it private. Dominic stared down at the faces of the Dago's prisoners in front of him, every one of them a noble-born soldier. But one face stood out from the crowd. What is your name? He demanded. Emmanuel Dagos, illegitimate son of the late king. Dominic nodded. Well, Prince Emmanuel, as you are still technically royalty, as the new king never rescinded your title, only that of Kaizan, what should I do with you? The prince sighed. Out of respect for the throne, if not the lineage, I ask that you make it private. Beside him, Elder Manif of the Duskblade sect nodded, and Dominic extended his hand to help the prince rise. All right, I can agree to that. Now for the rest of them. Prince Emmanuel, how many of these men were conscripted, and how many are loyal sons of Dagos? Every man here, myself included, was conscripted by the army. There are no other noble sons of Dagos remaining in this force. There were dozens of them an hour ago, but your sharpshooters have uncanny accuracy for officers. That was understandable. Remove the chain of command, and unit cohesion collapses. The imbalanced mana in Dominic's body still seemed to be increasing, and he couldn't find a reason for it. The mages were long dead. He wasn't actively absorbing mana, as his internal reserves hadn't even been used, much less depleted. But still, he could feel the effect growing. Elder, I am feeling lenient. Pick a city in the west, and send the survivors away. A 1,000-hour work contract in a foreign land should give them time to repent their sins. Elder Manif looked more than shocked at Dominic's unusual show of mercy, but he didn't object. He simply opened a portal into what was obviously a dungeon and took a form out of his coat to add a few notes. Then he stepped through and spoke quietly to the prison warden before exchanging some cash. It will be done. 1,000 hours of hard labor in the gold mines. Unlikely to kill them, but it will teach them a lesson about when to run and when to fight. The soldiers sighed ruefully. It had seemed more dangerous to defy the mages in Shersdonia than it had been to follow them. That had proven to be absolutely incorrect. But at least the Duke here had spared their lives after they had surrendered, instead of holding a grand trial to have them hanged as a public spectacle under the flimsiest of excuses. Dominic shook his head, trying to remove the fuzzy feeling, and Larry the healing troll rushed through to cleanse him, only to find that he was fine. Or that he wasn't cursed, poisoned, or under attack. In fact, his health appeared to be perfect. There was no physical reason for his condition. Then, Prince Emmanuel's eyes shot wide open, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Damn it, I should have known. No royal prisoners. Kaizon's last proclamation, he wheezed. What do you mean, last? Dominic demanded, trying to focus. But the prince simply collapsed dead. A rush of power surged from the area into Dominic, and he felt something inside him break. Not a bone or organ. It felt more like something had shattered and set him free, as if the lingering rage and animosity of his past had simply vanished. The power faded as quickly as it had started, leaving everyone on the battlefield confused. However, without an enemy to target, all that was left was to clean up the bodies so they didn't attract scavengers. That was a task for Dave, as the riflemen were in their party clothes. Gentlemen, good work. Brush yourself off. Come see Larry if you need healing, or the Royal Guards if you're feeling brave. Then you can return to the debutante ball. Dominic announced, raising his voice so that everyone would hear him. The Natural Sons cheered and laughed. Their losses were non-existent in this battle. They had healing potions, and the mages had fronted the battle for them. The Duskblade sect had taken casualties, mages who had been knocked from the sky, but there were no dead among the riflemen. Dominic placed a hand on Elder Manif's shoulder. Let's take care of yours. The riflemen will be fine with Larry. We can bring the Royal Guard here to do the healing of anyone who can be saved. He whispered. Far off to the northwest, in the city of Ormstead, two ancient necromancers sat across a chessboard from each other, sipping tea. Did it work? I believe that it did. The influx of unholy energy overwhelmed the blood curse, and with the death of the royal bloodline in his immediate vicinity, the curse reacted as if the vendetta had been settled. We will know more in just a few hours, but I believe that the curse on Dagos should be broken now. The other mage replied. Do we tell the king? The second man snorted disdainfully. Are you not fond of your immortal life anymore? You know how fond he was of the Dragon King. I wouldn't count on keeping any part of your soul intact if he found out that you had cheated that old dragon's kin out of his vengeance. The two necromancers laughed at the memory. They had done many things in the past year to set this moment in motion, and to make it believable when the curse broke before the entire royal lineage of Dagos was eliminated. They couldn't have that. After all, they were also cousins of the foolish king. And all that it had taken was a few sects of necromancers and half a year of summoning rituals. If they had come up with this plan years ago, they could have saved themselves much grief and ever having to deal with that idiot Kaizon. Now, to sit back and feign innocence when Signia sent their prodigal son to face off with the king. It should be a most interesting meeting. Chapter 496, Backlash. Unaware that there was far more to this invasion than simply misguided aggression and incompetence, Dominic started immediately making plans to reinforce the area around the city, in preparation to have the new noblemen move into their own homes. That wasn't normal. We should have you checked out. Alexis whispered as Dominic returned to town. I feel fine though. More than fine, really. Almost like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. It's not easy to explain. Alexis frowned. He looked fine, but she had felt the imbalance in his mana, the cursed energy flowing into his body. There had to be some sort of side effect of that which couldn't be shrugged off with a simple "but it's Dominic." Unable to cleanse it with the magic of anyone in their employment, and with no visible symptoms, Alexis simply accepted that it was an issue for later. They weren't short on issues to deal with of their own, and fretting over an anomaly that she couldn't even explain, much less solve, would get her nowhere. She was about to return to her duties as hostess when a radio message from the airships changed her plans. Massive thunderstorm forming northeast toward Staptentave. Airships are preparing to redeploy to avoid wind damage. Repeat that message, she demanded of the maid with the radio. Massive thunderstorm to the northeast toward Staptentave. Airships are preparing to redeploy to avoid wind damage, Your Highness. The veiled maid repeated dutifully. There hasn't been a major thunderstorm over Staptentave in a decade. That is correct, Highness. Inland forces in Dagos are preparing for severe weather. Reports of thunderstorms, tornadoes, heavy rainfall with risks of flash flooding, and a budding typhoon off the coast of Chip, headed southwest toward Albrols. The airship commander relayed. What in the seven hells is going on? Did the gods give up on drought, and now they're trying to drown Dagos? Alexis asked nobody in particular. Perhaps the curse has matured. It's only a few weeks to the 13th anniversary of the invasion. As I recall, that's a significant number to the witches. One of the royal guards suggested. You think that the drought has matured into a full-blown apocalypse? Alexis asked. It's an option. Alexis smiled behind her hand, then ushered the debutantes away from the portal. This part is just drudgery. Why don't we head back to the garden? The gents of the Natural Sons have a new story to tell, and perhaps they might need a little mending and comfort. She suggested. That was a wonderful idea, they thought. Unwinding after a stressful moment was the perfect time to prove themselves. Dominic was just happy that it got them all away from the portal before they had to start digging through the battlefield looking for fallen mages of the Duskblade sect. Most of them had surprisingly survived the fall from the sky, though not in the most pleasant of ways. As battle mages, trained in that sort of combat, they had prepared emergency life-saving techniques and devices. So, when Dominic went hunting for them with Betty and a bag full of healing potions, he found most of them breathing, though heavily wounded. They didn't have anyone high enough in the clergy to resurrect, as far as he knew. But the potions were top grade, and as long as they were still breathing, there was a good chance for them to recover. You pour the potion down their throat, I will set their limbs. Dave instructed. Just be careful, humans are more fragile than trolls. Dave gave Dominic a double thumbs-up gesture after hanging his club and shield. We should get more healing Larry trolls. Mountain trolls aren't good at healing other things. Dave complained. We can talk to the village when their goats arrive. Why do they get goats? For helping in the last fight. Did you know that they didn't have any goats at all? Dave gave him a horrified look at the thought. Dominic had definitely done the right thing by getting them a herd, even if that was fewer goats that would end up at the manor. Eventually, the whole battlefield was clear, and the final tally was done. 3 acolytes, whose families would receive benefits from the duchy, and a lot of wounded, who would be out of action for some time. That wasn't as big of a deal, as they could move to the academy side for some time and work teaching students while they recovered from the magical injuries that they had taken. Necromantic and unholy magic was tricky to recover from, but they had experience and just needed enough time between battles. Have you found a cause for this strange phenomenon? Elder Manif asked as the last of the wounded were sent back to the tower. Dominic shook his head. But it has to be connected to the strange weather. Which makes me think that it's connected to the curse on Dagos. Perhaps the death of the prince left too few members of the royal family and military command as targets for the curse? I mean, would the curse have just applied to the whole nation? Probably not. It's likely tied to the people who actually committed the attack. So, as they die off, it will weaken. Manif shrugged. That makes as much sense as any theory that I have come up with. There are likely even more unnatural phenomenon occurring that I haven't heard about yet, since I am only getting the relay of the airship radios and some feed from our allies in Axbridge. Which meant that they weren't getting anything from the other side of the storms, as lightning interfered with radios. However, the storm fronts were huge. Just going by what they could see, the airships could get a pretty decent idea of what was going on. Keep close to the radio. There might be something coming our way as well, and I want as much warning as possible if we're going to have a major storm hitting while the nobles are here for their dating event. Manif gave him a conspiratorial smile. Not planning to have a mud wrestling pit out in the campgrounds? Now that you mention it. Chapter 497. Extreme Weather. Over the course of the next 3 hours, the storms all over Dagos and offshore to the north of the continent continued to increase in severity, to the point that it was clear there would be no outcome except natural disaster. First reports are in. Albrols is getting a centimeter of rain an hour, with rains expected to continue for at least 2 more days. Julio reported, then sighed, and continued. The typhoon is turning south, hitting Chip, West Kiria, and northeastern Dagos. Sustained winds over 200 kilometers an hour, rain in excess of 3 centimeters an hour. Not good. I don't know any other way to put it. But in the northwest, near the border of Schiphol, they're not getting it any better. They're getting tornadoes and extreme lightning. There are wildfires spreading all over the region. The airships of the fleet have run west and are currently offshore, so they don't cause an international incident. The storms only extend for 50 kilometers or so past the borders, and the storm from Staptentave is headed inland, not toward us. However, we have a storm forming overhead, as you might have noticed. No estimate on how bad that will be, but we think that it's a natural storm that is forming in place due to the disturbance in Dagos. Until that is settled, there is no way to tell what is natural and what is not. Dominic sighed. Are we going to have to start sending relief supplies in once the storms clear? Undoubtedly. I mean, if we actually want to help. There isn't going to be much that isn't flooded or storm damaged in the entire country. If anyone survives the fallout, and they likely should if there isn't too much more coming after this round of storms, then they're going to need every type of support that we can offer, from food to clothing and rebuilding of infrastructure. The cities should be relatively fine, other than the flooding, but the peasant housing outside the cities is mostly tin over wood frames. They're not going to hold up to a decent wind, much less what they're getting. Technically, it's not our problem. But it's going to become our problem if we start getting hundreds of thousands of refugees out of Dagos. That would be chaos. Hundreds of thousands of people who had lost everything in the storm would strain every city and town's resources, and most of them would be from cities, without the skills that would be needed to start over as farmers, living off the land. But the cities wouldn't have jobs for them all. We will have to do something about that then. At least enough to encourage them to stay home and rebuild. I think that it can wait until the event is over. How are we doing on the housing requests for couples that are looking to marriage? Julio smiled. We've had quite a few. We're separating them for now, but that's pending your decisions. As Duke of the Territory, it is up to you to preside over the weddings and give your formal approval in lieu of their parents' personal presence. While the princess does technically outrank you, the territory is granted in your name to your lineage, so this particular duty can only be done by you personally. And I have been slacking and distracted by other tasks, so none of the actual weddings have been planned. But that's an issue I need to speak with you about as well. Do we do a mass wedding, where each couple goes up one after another on the same day? Or should we arrange them all over town for smaller groups, but possible scheduling conflicts? I believe that the only option will be a group wedding, and we might not even have the luxury of giving them their own venue. We have over 300 new nobles who are going to be moving into the duchy to account for, and the majority of them will be married soon. But then there are all the others, and I have just received word that more are on their way. All the noble sons in the northeast, near the Dagos border, are afraid that the storms will come in and wipe them out, so they're planning to send their unwed and marriageable children our way if they don't already have a planned alliance. Normally, they would wait a year or two. The northeast usually marries later. But it's better to get them set up before word comes in about damages to their territory. Dominic shook his head in dismay. It was a cynical way of looking at things, but if their home territory really did take heavy damage from the storms, their marriage prospects would tank. The sons at least. But there were other issues that had to be settled first. Namely, the fact that the Dagos ladies' presence was seen as a bad omen not only by the other ladies but by many of the men. They had just arrived here, and then there was a major attack and an outbreak of natural disasters. What else could everyone think than that their entire nation was cursed? Technically, they weren't wrong. But the Dagos territories were cursed many years before this party started, and it was more likely that the old curse was breaking than that a new one was just starting. They hadn't done anything monumentally stupid in at least 3 weeks. Should I prepare a speech for you, sir?
Julio asked.
No, I will make it up as I go. As soon as we finish here, I will open scheduling for the weddings and make an announcement of support for the former Dagos ladies. Are you sure that is wise? Do you think that refusing to support them would do anything but reduce the respect they got as the wives of knights? It doesn't cost me anything to speak in support of them, and the boys will thank me for not putting them in a difficult spot. Julio smiled. So, this is for the less marriageable men among the regiment? I see what you're after. Some of those gents would be better suited to a half-trollish sorcerer than a noble lady, no matter their status, in both appearance and manners. But given a few weeks to remember that battlefield etiquette isn't noble etiquette, they'll be back to something resembling their old false personas. Chapter 498. Causes Changes. Dominic and Julio were both still laughing as Dominic stepped out onto the balcony of his office, overlooking the garden. A few nobles looked up, but Dominic placed his fingers to his lips and whistled to get everyone's attention, a sound that echoed over music, conversation, and left Julio cursing as his ears rang. "Warn a man before you do that," he whispered, then backed away to let Dominic speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the continental nobility, my apologies for interrupting your afternoon activities. I have news for you all. Starting now, I will be accepting applications to schedule formal weddings. The paperwork can be done in advance, and the wedding ceremony itself scheduled for any available spot if you prefer. All noble weddings organized at this event may be blessed under the authority of the duchy, if that is your wish. Furthermore, in light of the disasters to the north, I would like to make one thing clear. The ladies formerly of Dagos are guests of the duchy, and in the absence of news on their birth families, they shall be treated as temporary wards of the duchy. If they are married during this event, they will marry not as foreign nobles, but as resident guests of the Westover extended holdings, with their birth family's lineage as proof of noble blood. Though Westover is not a finishing school, I will take the role of ensuring that the guests at this event are all treated fairly when it comes time to wed. There will be no forced marriages or unwanted secondary status arrangements. If anyone attempts to force such an arrangement, the duchy will stand on their behalf. I appreciate your efforts to ensure that despite the interruptions and adverse conditions, this remains a respectable source of marital arrangements." The crowd clapped politely as Dominic finished, and after a moment, he raised his hand to gather their attention. "That said, we are expecting even more guests and further extensions on the timeline. Signia's territories from the Cleoe region and the far northeast, as well as many more noble-blooded youth from Limpsbury, are on their way here for the event, intending to escape the border region's poor weather this season. I am told that there are debutantes from the eastern border regions of Axbridge on their way here as well, though that remains to be confirmed, as they may stop at Withdeaton first and remain there." What Dominic didn't mention was that Kynwyn, the former capital of Wavemates, with a population of nearly 2 million, was also undergoing extreme weather, and it sat along a major river, which had already breached its banks. A large part of the city had been evacuated already, with more coming. While it was over 800 kilometers away, if you flew directly there was still a chance that many of the old noble families would send their children to safety here. Dominic could hear the radio in his office as he spoke, and half the chatter was about superstitions, curses, and redemption. The rest was about the weather itself and the efforts to escape it. The only spot that was mutually deemed to be a safe zone was Westover or regions to the south of Signia City. Everything closer to Dagos, including the northern regions of West Kyria and the entire nation of Chip, were planning evacuations. Those regions certainly wouldn't be coming here, but the news of their panic caused others to panic in a chain reaction, and that only reinforced the superstitions, especially among those who had Dagos' noble lineage married into their families. "Your Grace, does that mean the event will be extended?" one of the ladies asked hopefully. "Indeed. The event is likely to last at least 3 more weeks at this rate, though we will be making some changes in the housing arrangements. Those camped outside the city will be reorganized to either stay in newly built housing or with common families. The rains are going to make it untenable to maintain dignity in such camps outside the city for an extended time. Our apologies to the soldiers of Axbridge and Mitfield, who are obligated to return to their units between events. We will assist as much as possible to improve the camps if any structures still need to be prepared for the rains. Additional changing tents, so that traveling clothes may be exchanged for party wear after arrival, will be added this afternoon. That was good news for everyone who wasn't staying in the manor, but the city had stone streets, so even when it was raining, they only arrived with wet shoes, not muddy to the ankles like they would in many other towns. Or with unmentionable filth on their feet, like some of the towns that still had masses of horses traveling dirt streets. There was a reason nobles always traveled by carriage. Now that he mentioned it, the manor itself was going to need some renovations to hold such an event during the rainy season. They didn't have enough space inside the ballrooms for so many to be comfortable, which is why they were spread to the gardens, with the meetings taking place inside for privacy. But that didn't work when it was raining. He was going to have to find a way to get awnings erected over the garden so they could continue to use the space without everyone getting soaked. Umbrellas and parasols as a fashion accessory only helped so much. They could likely make a copper awning to go over the entire garden, but he would have to talk to the engineers about the structure, so it didn't fly away in the wind. Expanding the house in the middle of a party wasn't feasible, and the commoners were using the Adventurers Guild Hall's event center. Most of it. The officers and nobles were still monopolizing the gambling den in the basement. It was surprising how fast everyone seemed to have learned about that after the regiment arrived. They were tempering their gambling, as they needed money to rebuild a life here. But not so much that the place would ever be empty. Chapter 499. Updated timeline. The rains came at the same time that the first airships out of Axbridge and Northern Signia arrived. The regular route airships that traveled the regions had been redirected due to extreme weather, and these had been chartered to bring nobles to Westover. That left Dominic in a pinch. They were still rearranging the event grounds and the gardens, and the infrastructure team was working overtime to build an extra level in one of the warehouses, so they could use it as extra housing for new arrivals. The guest camps were being relocated smoothly, as far as he knew, but they were out of empty houses to put any new people in, and there weren't many empty beds in town either. The airships were likely to be staying on location until the storms calmed, and a few people could stay in them. But given how the others had arrived, standing room only and struggling to maintain altitude, that would not do much to help their issues. My lord, if you have a moment, the airship construction team requests your presence. One of the city guards informed Dominic nervously as he worked on paperwork for the Merchant Guild orders they had placed to keep up the supply levels for the event. Just the distraction I need. Julio, I will return in under an hour. The castellan sighed as the Duke got up to leave. At least finish signing off on these purchase orders first. Dominic sat back down and went over the orders line by line. Even if he was eager to get away from the paperwork, he wouldn't slack on proofreading the orders for mistakes. The last thing they needed was a full shipment of something useless because of a careless quantity mistake. 10 minutes later, the orders were ready to be sent to Rill, and Dominic was out the door, headed for the airship factory. On the way, he had to pass the Merchant Guild warehouses, and Dominic noticed that there were actually 3 caravans staged in the city today. That was far more than they needed for what they had ordered, and as far as he knew, the warehouses were already filling with stored goods to be sent out during the wet season before these storms started. Do you know what is up with the caravans? Dominic asked the guard, who was still accompanying him. I believe that they're stocking up for the new barons and knights. There is a lot of talk about who will settle where within the territory, and the merchants know that they'll need a lot if they're going to renovate the old barony houses to impress a noble bride. But they're also stocking things they expect you to order and other things they expect the city to need. I heard that they brought in an entire trailer full of cots, enough to supply a regiment. If you forgive my presumption, Your Grace, I suspect they expect you to need to purchase them soon. Dominic chuckled. I suspect that they're right. The infrastructure team has been building a mezzanine into the new warehouse they were working on, and the report from engineer Marco says that it would be a good spot to assign as sleeping quarters. The guard nodded. And stone floors are much harder than a mat on dirt or grass, so they'll want cots if they're setting up tents inside. Dominic hadn't thought of it that way. He had thought they would set it up like a dorm room, but setting tents inside would give some notion of privacy, and everyone had brought them. Dominic smiled as he remembered doing the same thing many times before to escape storms, then struggled to merge that mental image of a tent in an abandoned ruin to a bunch of noblemen preparing to go to a party. All right, let's see what the airship shop has to say, and then I will go and work on arranging more space for visitors. This weather is going to mess everything up more than a regular wet season would. Dominic replied with a sigh. The guard shrugged. It's not all bad. With so many noblemen in town looking for wives, we don't have to worry about them messing with our daughters. Plus, the amount of money they spend is pretty good. My wife works at the bakery, and they've been insanely busy with all the pastry requests. That's inevitable, I think. They're the only major bakery in town at the moment, and the whole town is growing. I'm surprised that they're still keeping up with demand. The guard laughed. Oh, they're not. They're baking constantly while they're open, and they've hired an overnight shift to make the bread so that the morning crew can focus on pastries and coffee grinding. Thankfully, we've got Beth. Without her baking, the manor would be in real trouble. But even she is struggling to keep up with demand, and the manor has a rather impressive kitchen. They were also cooking in some of the other buildings, where Larry could prepare the soups, stews, and gravies, taking some strain off the main staff. There were many more foods and sauces than usual for Signia, more akin to Axbridge cuisine. But that was because the only food Larry understood was soup. If it wasn't in a sauce, it wasn't food he was willing to cook. He would consider roasting meat. You just had to rescue it before he put the resultant roast meat in the stew for flavor. The dwarves were waiting for him when Dominic arrived at the airship factory, excited smiles on their faces.
We've got a prototype.
Full scale, with the basic amenities included. Come check it out, and let us know what you think. It's been quite the adventure trying to treat an entire farm worth of cloth to cover the bloody thing, but we've got a system down now. We filled it this morning, and it seems to be holding helium. It's anchored to the floor, but as soon as we start to deflate the balancing bladders, it pulls the chains taut. We might have to adjust that a bit. It's almost too light when it's fully unloaded. With full water tanks it's a bit better, but still pretty light. We did a bit too well with the weight reduction. Chapter 500. Better than expected. Dominic stared at the airship and its modular compartments. They had not only built the airship with the cargo container that they had discussed with the Merchants Guild, they had made a second cargo compartment that was fitted with cannon doors and blocks. That way, it could be switched between cargo and military uses in under an hour. It was brilliant, and the way that it was designed, only a Magitech engineer familiar with the design would figure out how to do it, even though it was actually quite simple to operate once you knew how. This is brilliant. I did not expect you to have this ready for another few months. Dominic congratulated the team. Honestly, neither did we. But once we started assembling the ribs in sections on the ground, it just got so much faster to do the job. All we had to do was lift them into position and put a dozen bolts in. We considered using hot press rivets, but stover nuts were easier, and then we didn't have to put hot metal in the air to finish the work. Everything is made with a Cartwright metal, at least everything structural is. So, we don't need to worry much about the strength, even with the lightened structure. We got it down to under a half the expected weight of a conventional airframe, and we're up nearly 15 tons on cargo capacity, which is why we're struggling to get it heavy enough with the ballast bladders. The current plan is just to increase the amount of water normally carried in the steam tanks that drive the turbines. That gives us most of our ballast, but we can also put a bit of plate steel in the bottom as both armor and ballast. Making it bottom heavy will help with stability as well. The other cabin is armored. It had to be, given its purpose. But it's only intended to load cannons into, not cargo, so there will be a lot of extra capacity, no matter how you look at it. We can load it with paratroopers as well. Putting a bunch more people in there will add some weight and give the airships a secondary purpose. Airdropping riflemen behind enemy lines is a brilliantly effective tactic.
Dominic suggested. The dwarves nodded.
You can do that with this setup. The cargo doors slide, so you can open them in motion if you really want. They do double lock, so they don't come open by accident, but they could be used to airdrop troops. Given the space and the capacity, there is no reason that you couldn't get hundreds of paratroopers with their gear into the airship. It would be more than enough to turn the tides in a battle with the new style rifles that we saw you and the Princess Guards using. The rapid firing, the mana bullets, the spell gem embedded in the rifle for extra effect. With all that going for it, they're pretty near perfect for paratroopers, especially the shorter-barreled ones. Long rifles might be more accurate over long distances, but from what the riflemen tell us, most engagements that aren't from a city wall don't happen over distances longer than 50 or 100 meters. You have a point. Most of the time we're firing from under 50 meters away, so all the fancy optics and long barrels aren't practical. The reload speed and ammunition capacity matters much more to their effectiveness. We considered making rifle racks for the military compartment, but we didn't have dimensions. There is a storage locker, though. It's easy enough to put any sort of hangers or racks that you want in them, and they can be locked for security. That's good for staff gear and other stuff you don't want floating around the hold. But the customers will want to do a lot of the customization themselves, especially the military units. They will want the main hull and likely the self-loading cannons. But the rest will be altered to their specifications so that they're not too easily predicted by enemy forces. Dominic reminded them. Oh, good point. We will have more than one customer for these. But we've got it ready for a test flight now. The only issue is that the winds are picking up, and that's not protocol for a first flight. It's supposed to be done under clear skies in case of loss of communication or control. We know that the turbines work, we ran them, and the thrust is within our design parameters. If everything works the way that the math says that it should, we are looking at close to 100 kilometers an hour cruising speed, with 75% thrust. Going faster than that causes extreme air resistance, as we optimized for cargo, not for streamlining. But if we alter the envelope for the military ships, we should be able to have them cruise at close to 130 kilometers an hour. That's fast enough to run down our cargo airships, as well as anything that we are aware of the other nations fielding at this point. That likely means that we should make something that can run down our airships if we need it, in case someone reverse engineers them. But that can come later. The important part is that we have an airship ready to go, and we can tell all the nobles about it before they go home. That will give us a chance to show off for our customers, and if we get a bunch of royals here before the end of the event, we can send them home in the airship, then take back a load of cargo as proof of capability. Once the guild sees that we really can safely move the 50 tons that we promised and more, we should start getting more orders than we can fill. Dominic smiled. They're looking forward to having it up and running. The storms will be a hassle, but I suspect that we're going to see more issues coming out of this extreme weather than just a few more guests and some rain. The feeling that I get is that there's going to be a fundamental change to the region.